The survival, indeed the success of Israel, is very important to the United States. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel has an economic free market, and the United States and Israel share virtually the same values with the same moral compass. It has been my serious concern that Israel, by virtue of over 500,000 settlers in the West Bank, has eliminated the opportunity of a two-state solution. This is what I have said in the past. No need to be chanting death to Israel. They are doing it to themselves with the suicidal decision to settle the West Bank. I no longer believe that to be true. A one-state alternative seemed undoable, impractical, and threatens the very nature of Israel as a democratic Jewish state. Well, maybe not.
Israel is a small state surrounded by Arab countries 650 times its size. Only 44 miles separate between the Jordan Valley and the Mediterranean Sea. If Israel were forced back to the 1949 armistice lines, the Green Line, the country's width would be reduced to a narrow 9-mile waistline that would be impossible to defend.
So therein lies the dilemma. The Palestinians see the West Bank as their new homeland, but the Israelis see the West Bank as critical to their defense. I believe the answer to the problem comes from two extraordinary women. Dr. Karmai is a Palestinian doctor of medicine, author, and academic. Ms. Glick is the deputy managing editor of the Jerusalem Post. These two women could hardly be farther apart politically, but they have come to very similar conclusions.
We don't talk about the two-state solution because it's dead.
And the book, which is divided into 3 parts, says, A, in part 1, this is why the two-state solution will fail.
So it would seem to me that the best thing the Palestinians can do is to dissolve the Palestinian Authority
And dismantling of the Palestinian Authority
and revert to direct Israeli rule.
The solution is for Israel to apply its laws, its sovereignty to the West Bank.
We are unequal, so we demand equal civil and legal rights
And provide civil rights.
Well, here is the problem with that. You will note that Arabs and Jews make up approximately 50% each of the total population. And that leads to this.
The threat of a one-state reality endangers the founding vision for Israel as both a Jewish and democratic state. Israel cannot be Jewish, democratic, and control all the land at the same time. If it chooses democracy and the land, then it cannot be a Jewish state. Arabs will soon outnumber Jews between the Mediterranean and the Jordan. If it chooses to be Jewish and also to control all the land, then it cannot be a democracy.
It is this phenomenon that causes Dr. Karmai to be so in favor of a one-state solution. She sees the opportunity for Arabs to outnumber Jews.
I always understood the two-state solution to automatically include Gaza, but Gaza is practically an independent state all by itself.
I'm not
What do you
including Gaza.
propose? What do you propose for Gaza? What do you see the future with Israel and Gaza?
I think we should leave it in God's hands.
It's a stretch of land 41 kilometres long and between 6 and 12 kilometres wide, covering just 360 square kilometres.
Gaza is very small in area, but very big with problems. So by taking Gaza out of the equation, We are no longer at 50-50. Now it's 58% to 42%.
Well, what about the population numbers? I've heard it over and over again, the demographics, that Israel will cease to remain a Jewish state.
Right. So, that was a fiction that was concocted in 1997 by the PLO. They inflated the Palestinian base population by 50%, and then by 1.34 million people.
So, if Ms. Glick is correct, that really improves the math. Just take away that 1.34 million Arabs, and all of a sudden the Jews represent 2/3 of the total population, and apartheid is mitigated.
Look at the division between the PA, Fatah, and Hamas.
The reference to Hamas by Dr. Carmi clearly indicates that she is including Gaza in her one-state solution. So this is where we say goodbye to Dr. Carmi. Caroline Glick is a policy wonk.
For Israel to apply its laws and through it its sovereignty to Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. And the Palestinians who live there will be accorded the rights of permanent residency status in Israel.
Ms. Glick, what you just described is apartheid, and it is a deal breaker. For this plan, One Nation Indivisible, to produce a favorable outcome, it will need to include the absolute right of the newly minted Israeli Arabs to vote in national elections by a date certain. Peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians have been going on for decades. It has been a fruitless endeavor without a hint of peace. It is time for a new approach. And these are two of the primary negotiators for each side.
Some issues simply cannot be negotiated. And I think we will get to a point of complete deadlock when we try to negotiate, say, on the issue of refugees. What is the genesis of the issue of refugees? What was 1948? And how can you negotiate something like this? When 1948, in Arabic, it's called the Nakba, the catastrophe. For any Israeli, it was the year where the diaspora ended and the homeland was created. How do you negotiate that? It's impossible.
There will never be a negotiated settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The wounds on both sides are just too deep.
So you require leaders who decide that they're going to make history. And the question is, do you have leaders who are prepared to do that?
What we have is President Obama with a year left in his presidency, and we have Mr. Abbas, who will be part of an abandoned Palestinian Authority. Fortunately, Mr. Netanyahu is a very strong leader. President Nixon was able to go to China because he was clearly identified as an anti-communist. Mr. Netanyahu, coming at this from the far right, is clearly at advantage. Disenchanted with a two-state solution, this could be Mr. Netanyahu's chance to shine. But he will have to make the West Bank an attractive place for Arabs to live.
The core issues, and particularly the narrative issues of Jerusalem and refugees, are part of historic narratives that have been told over and over and over again.
The disposition of Jerusalem will go a long way toward selling the plan. The city could be internationalized, but it would remain under the total control and administration of the nation of Israel. In addition, serious consideration should be given to relocating the United Nations from New York City to Jerusalem. Dealing with the right of return will be a big challenge.
And there'll probably be a set of circumstances under which a limited number, where the Israelis are the ones who can make the decision, are allowed to return to Israel, either under a humanitarian rubric, some family reunification basis, something of that sort that keeps the numbers small.
And then there are some cosmetics needed for the West Bank. Wherever possible, soldiers should be replaced by police officers. Checkpoints should be eliminated wherever possible, as soon as possible. Mr. Netanyahu should consider the redesign of the Israeli flag.
You have to show something's different. That's part of preparing the ground for doing a deal. And that's part of the way you also deal with the rejectionists, because you build the constituencies who favor this outcome.
With this outcome, Israel avoids the unpleasantness of having a neighboring Palestinian state that does not wish it well. Eliminating a two-state solution allows Israel to permanently incorporate the West Bank into defensible borders with no hostile forces in a neighboring Palestinian state. And this is accomplished with the Jewish population going from a 3-to-1 ratio to a 2-to-1 ratio. And this is the new Israel. One nation, indivisible.